We live in a world that constantly tells us that being alone is a problem. Movies, social media, and even our friends and family reinforce this idea that if you are alone, something is wrong with you. People rush into relationships they don't even want, keep friendships that drain them, and surround themselves with distractions just to avoid facing themselves. But what if everything we've been taught about solitude is a lie? What if being alone is not a weakness but a superpower? What if, instead of fearing solitude, we embraced it the way the greatest minds in history did: Musashi, Nietzsche, Buddha, Marcus Aurelius? These were not lonely men. They were powerful, self-sufficient, and deeply connected to life in a way most people never experience. The truth is, most people are not afraid of being alone. They are afraid of what they will find when the noise stops, when there are no texts, no notifications, no meaningless conversations, just silence. And in that silence, you are forced to confront yourself, your thoughts, your fears, your insecurities. This is why people run from solitude. They don't want to meet the person they've been avoiding their entire lives themselves. But here's the paradox. The more you run from solitude, the lonelier you feel. You can be in a crowded room and feel completely disconnected. You can have thousands of followers and still feel unseen. Because loneliness has nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with being disconnected from yourself. Musashi understood this. He lived by a profound principle: think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. What does this mean?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
It means detaching from the false self, the ego that constantly seeks validation, approval, and attention. It means shifting your focus from how others perceive you to understanding life itself. He knew that the pursuit of external validation is a trap. When you depend on others for happiness, you give them control over your mind. You become a prisoner of opinion, constantly adjusting yourself to fit in. But when you master solitude, you take back that control. You become untouchable, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that makes you unshaken by external circumstances. And here's the irony. The moment you stop needing people, the right ones start gravitating toward you naturally. They sense your completeness, your self-sufficiency, your absence of desperation. The people who fear solitude often say things like, "But humans are social creatures. We need connection." And they're right, but they misunderstand what true connection is. Connection is not being surrounded by people 24/7. Connection is not having 1,000 friends who don't truly know you. Real connection starts with yourself. If you don't understand yourself, if you don't love your own company, how can you expect anyone else to? Musashi spent years in solitude, refining his mind, mastering his craft, and developing an unshakable spirit. He wasn't lonely. He was free. And this is the lesson most people miss. Solitude is not about isolation. It's about purification. It's about stripping away the unnecessary, cutting out the noise, and focusing on what truly matters. Think about this. When was the last time you spent an entire day without distractions? No phone, no music, no entertainment. Just you, your thoughts, and reality. Most people can't handle this because they've built a life that is completely dependent on distractions. But the wise seek moments of solitude because they know that in stillness there is clarity. And in clarity there is power. Now here's the real question. If you suddenly lost all your friends, all your followers, and all your external validation, who would you be? Would you still feel like you have value? Would you still feel like you have purpose? Or would you feel empty, like something is missing? This question is not to scare you. It's to wake you up, because if your sense of worth is built entirely on external factors, you are living on unstable ground. True strength comes from within, and solitude is the path to discovering it. The strength of solitude, why Musashi was never lonely, and why you shouldn't be either. Most people misunderstand solitude because they confuse it with loneliness, but they are not the same. Loneliness is a craving for external validation, a feeling of absence, a void that demands to be filled. Solitude, on the other hand, is fullness. It is self-sufficiency. It is a state where nothing is missing because nothing external is needed. Musashi knew this. He was never lonely, not because he avoided people, but because he never needed them to complete him. He understood that true strength comes from within, and anyone who relies on others for their sense of worth remains weak. Society trains people to fear being alone because a person who is completely content in solitude cannot be controlled. They do not seek approval. They do not conform. They do not obey out of fear. They are free. This is why so many distractions exist to keep people from ever reaching this level of self-sufficiency. Endless entertainment, constant social media updates, superficial relationships, all designed to keep the mind occupied so that people never stop to realize how dependent they have become. But those who master solitude see through this illusion. They understand that the greatest power is not in numbers, not in popularity, not in constant engagement with others, but in the ability to stand alone, unshaken, unaffected, untouchable. Musashi spent years wandering, training, refining his mind and body. Not because he disliked people, but because he knew that solitude is where true mastery is born. He understood that the deepest insights, the most profound realizations, and the strongest character are forged in silence, not in noise. And yet, most people fear silence. They fill every moment with sound, with stimulation, with conversation, because silence forces them to confront themselves. And confronting oneself is terrifying for those who have spent their entire lives avoiding it. But here's the truth: if you cannot be happy alone, you will never be happy with others. If you cannot enjoy your own company, no amount of friends, relationships, or social interactions will ever satisfy you. Because loneliness is not a lack of people. It is a lack of self-connection. When you are truly connected to yourself, you can be in complete isolation and still feel at peace. And when you reach this state, something incredible happens. The fear of being alone disappears. The need for constant validation fades. The desperation for attention dissolves. And in its place, a deep, unshakable strength emerges. A strength that makes you immune to manipulation. A strength that allows you to move through life with clarity, purpose, and confidence. Musashi had this strength, and you can have it too. But it requires a shift in perspective. It requires breaking free from the illusion that happiness comes from external sources. It requires understanding that the most valuable relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. And once you master this, everything changes. You no longer settle for meaningless interactions just to avoid being alone. You no longer waste energy trying to impress people who do not matter. You no longer fear solitude because you recognize it as the source of your power. And the best part, when you no longer need people, you attract the right ones effortlessly. The strongest relationships are not built on neediness, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. And the only way to build those relationships is to first become whole on your own. Musashi did not live in isolation because he hated the world. He lived in solitude because he wanted to master himself. And in doing so, he became someone worth knowing, someone worth following, someone worth remembering. So the question is, are you afraid of being alone because you truly dislike solitude, or are you afraid because it forces you to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding? The path of self-mastery, how solitude transforms you into someone unbreakable. Most people spend their entire lives running from themselves, filling every empty space with noise, distractions, and meaningless interactions just to avoid the weight of silence. They think being alone is the problem when in reality, it is the solution. Musashi understood this at the deepest level. He knew that solitude is not an escape from life, but an immersion into its deepest truths. It is in solitude that you confront your weaknesses, your insecurities, your fears, and instead of drowning in them, you learn to rise above them. The reason most people avoid being alone is because they don't like what they see when there is no one else around. They feel restless, anxious, uncomfortable, because they have never taken the time to truly know themselves. They have spent years shaping their identity based on external validation, on what others expect, on what society deems acceptable. But when all of that is stripped away, when the opinions are gone, when the social masks are removed, what remains? Most don't know, and that terrifies them. But those who master solitude do not fear this. They embrace it. They understand that true power comes from within, not from external approval. They realize that the strongest person is not the one with the most followers, the most connections, the most influence, but the one who is completely self-sufficient. Because a self-sufficient person cannot be manipulated. They cannot be controlled. They cannot be broken by rejection, by criticism, by loneliness, because they are whole within themselves. Musashi trained alone, walked alone, lived by his own code, not because he rejected the world, but because he refused to be weakened by it. He knew that the mind, like the body, must be disciplined, sharpened, refined through solitude. He understood that the greatest battles are not fought with swords but within the mind. And this is why solitude is essential, not as an escape, but as a battlefield where you forge yourself into something greater. When you are alone, you have no distractions, no one to blame, no one to rely on, just you and reality. And in that space, you either break or you grow. Weak people avoid this. They seek constant company, constant entertainment, anything to keep them from facing themselves. But strong people seek solitude because they understand that only in stillness can true growth happen. If you cannot sit in silence without feeling lost, you are not truly in control of yourself. If you cannot go a day without validation, without external stimulation, without someone reaffirming your worth, you are not truly free. freedom is not just about physical independence. It is about mental and emotional independence. It is about reaching a state where you do not need anything outside of yourself to feel whole. This is the lesson Musashi lived by. And the irony is, once you reach this level, life becomes effortless. You no longer chase happiness because you realize it was never something to be chased, it was something to be uncovered within. You no longer fear loneliness because you know that being alone is not the same as being lost. You no longer seek approval because you are already enough. And when you reach this state, everything changes. You become someone others respect, not because you seek their approval, but because your presence commands it. You become someone worth knowing, not because you need people, but because your energy draws the right ones effortlessly. You become untouchable not in a way that isolates you, but in a way that makes you unshaken by the world. This is the power of solitude. This is the truth Musashi lived and the truth most people will never understand because they are too afraid to walk the path alone. But if you do, if you embrace solitude instead of fearing it, you will realize something that will change your life forever. You were never truly alone to begin with. Because the moment you stop running from yourself, you realize that everything you were looking for was already within you.